Unit 47, suspicious person in stolen vehicle at Shell Station on Highway A9. Step away from the vehicle now!
Officer, this is my vehicle. What specific violation are you citing?
Don't play games! Where did you get this BMW? Who did you steal the uniform from?
I'm an active duty officer. I need you to articulate reasonable suspicion.
Real soldiers can't afford cars like this. You're running some scam in that costume.
This is my dress uniform. I can provide military identification.
Yeah, right. Turn around. You're under arrest for theft and impersonation.
What you just heard was the moment everything went wrong for Major David Richardson. But to understand how a decorated war hero ended up in handcuffs at a gas station, we need to go back to where this nightmare actually began. It was 11:23 p.m. on a Saturday night along the Interstate 85 corridor. The kind of weekend evening where the highway hums with life. College students heading back from parties, couples returning from date nights, families making their way home from events. The Shell station at Highway 9 was busy as it always is on weekend nights. Diesel trucks idling, music drifting from car windows, the familiar sounds of weekend America. Major David Richardson pulled his gleaming black BMW 5 Series up to the premium pump. The fluorescent lights caught the ribbons on his dress blue uniform as he stepped out of the vehicle. This was routine for him. Every Saturday night, same stop, same routine. Gas up, grab an energy drink, then the final 2-hour drive home to his family. Richardson had just left a military awards banquet in Atlanta. The kind of formal event where service members gather to honor their own. His uniform was immaculate. Dress blues pressed to perfection, ribbons arranged precisely according to regulation, combat boots polished to a mirror shine. Every detail spoke of military discipline and pride. A college student noticed him first. "That's a real uniform," she whispered to her friend. "Look at those ribbons." The gas station attendant watched through the bulletproof glass, recognition crossing his face. "That car's been here before. Same guy every weekend." But it wasn't just the uniform that caught attention. It was the way Richardson carried himself. Military bearing is unmistakable once you know what to look for. Spine straight, shoulders back, hands at his sides even while pumping gas. The kind of posture that comes from years of training, from serving your country with pride. Someone in the growing crowd recognized the details others might miss. "Those are jump wings. Airborne qualified." Another whispered, "Man drives that BMW every Saturday. Always polite, tips the attendant well." The people at that gas station that night had no idea they were about to witness something that would expose the ugly truth about assumptions, prejudice, and what happens when authority meets ignorance head-on. Major Richardson adjusted his tie, checked his GPS for the route home, and had no idea that in just minutes, his life would be turned upside down. He had no way of knowing that someone had already made a phone call that would change everything. An anonymous caller with a story that played right into every stereotype, every assumption about who belongs where and who deserves what. The stage was set. A decorated military officer, a luxury vehicle, a uniform that represented service and sacrifice. And on the other side, assumptions so deeply rooted that no amount of evidence would be enough to overcome them. What happened next would go viral, spark national outrage, and expose a system that talks about supporting our troops while failing them when it matters most. If you want to see how this shocking story unfolds and learn what really happens when the system fails our service members, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This story will change how you think about respect, service, and justice in America. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been judged based on assumptions about what you could or couldn't afford? Let me know in the comments because this story is about more than just one incident. The 911 call came in at 11:19 p.m. The voice was anonymous, but the message was clear. Black guy in military costume at the Shell station. Probably stole that BMW he's driving. Officer Jake Morrison was 3 years into his career, working the weekend patrol shift. When the call came through his radio, he saw it as routine. Another easy arrest. Another case of someone trying to be something they weren't. In his mind, the pieces already fit together perfectly. Black man, expensive car, military uniform. Obviously stolen valor. Obviously a con artist running some kind of scam. Morrison's assumptions ran deeper than just this moment. He'd grown up in a community where military service was respected, but military pay was understood to be modest. Real soldiers, in his worldview, drove modest cars and lived modest lives. The idea of a service member affording a BMW seemed impossible, suspicious, worth investigating. Real soldiers don't drive cars like this on army pay, Morrison thought as he pulled into the gas station parking lot. His prejudices were already writing the story before he even approached Richardson. Richardson was standing beside his vehicle, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. He'd served multiple deployments, earned his rank through dedication and sacrifice, and had every right to be exactly where he was. But none of that mattered to the officer approaching him with preconceived notions and a badge. "Step away from the vehicle now." Morrison's command cut through the Saturday night air like a blade. Richardson's military training kicked in immediately. "Stay calm. Comply when possible. Document everything." "Officer, this is my vehicle." "What specific violation are you citing?" That response, professional and measured, only irritated Morrison more. "Don't play games. Where did you get this BMW? Who did you steal the uniform from?" The accusations hit Richardson like physical blows. His uniform wasn't a costume. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed. But Morrison had already decided what he was looking at, and no amount of dignity or professionalism was going to change his mind. "I'm an active duty officer," Richardson responded, maintaining his composure despite the escalating situation. "I need you to articulate reasonable suspicion." Morrison's response revealed the depth of his assumptions. "Real soldiers can't afford cars like this. You're running some scam in that costume." Richardson tried to de-escalate by offering documentation. "This is my dress uniform. I can provide military identification." "Yeah, right. Turn around, you're under arrest for theft and impersonation." The crowd that had been casually observing suddenly became much more attentive. Phones started coming out, recording devices activated. But Morrison was beyond caring about witnesses. In his mind, he was making a righteous arrest. Richardson offered his vehicle registration first. "I don't care what fake papers you got," Morrison dismissed without even looking. Next came the military ID, the official identification that should have ended this confrontation immediately. Morrison glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds. "Anyone can buy costume uniforms online. Where's the real owner?" "The BMW key fob, insurance cards, even a Pentagon parking pass." Each piece of evidence was dismissed before Morrison could fully examine it. "You probably robbed some officer. Took his whole wallet." Richardson's training told him to stay calm, but the accusations were becoming increasingly outrageous. "Sir, call Fort Gordon. Verify my status and vehicle registration." "I'm not calling anyone. You're going to jail for theft." The confrontation triggered a memory Richardson wished he could forget. 3 months earlier, walking into the BMW dealership with his deployment savings and combat pay bonuses. The salesman's shocked expression when Richardson mentioned the price range he was considering. "You want to finance how much on military salary?" Richardson had taken quiet pride in explaining his situation. Years of deployment pay, combat bonuses, officer allowances, and careful saving had made his dream possible. The first new car he'd ever owned. A symbol of what service and sacrifice could achieve. Now it was being used as evidence of criminal behavior. "Need assistance with vehicle theft suspect." Morrison radioed for backup. Within minutes, 2 more units were responding to what they believed was a dangerous situation. The weekend crowd grew larger, more phones appeared, but witnesses were hesitant to get involved. Weekend partying makes people avoid police attention, even when they see something wrong happening. Richardson maintained his military bearing despite everything. "I will comply with lawful orders only." Morrison's frustration boiled over. "Stop talking like some TV lawyer." But Richardson recognized what was happening. No matter what evidence he provided, guilt had already been assumed. His race made him suspicious. His car made him guilty. His uniform made him a fraud. The pattern was familiar and it was terrifying. His internal voice, trained through years of military service, guided him. "Stay alive. Document everything. Let training guide you. Because sometimes, survival is more important than justice." Sergeant Phillips arrived to what looked like chaos. Morrison's briefing painted Richardson as dangerous. Stolen BMW, fake uniform, probably armed and dangerous. But Phillips had more experience than Morrison. He noticed things Morrison had missed. The genuine insignia on Richardson's uniform. The proper military bearing that's impossible to fake. The expensive vehicle that somehow seemed to fit with the man standing beside it. Phillips started asking the questions Morrison should have asked from the beginning. But by then, damage was already done, witnesses were recording, and what should have been a routine encounter had become a potential national incident. The confrontation at the gas station wasn't just about one man and one officer. It was about assumptions that run so deep they blind people to evidence. It was about the gap between supporting our troops in theory and respecting them in practice. It was about what happens when prejudice wears a badge and carries the authority of the law. This story gets even more shocking as the evidence mounts and the system tries to cover up what really happened. Subscribe now because you need to see how deep this goes and what happened when the truth finally came out. What would you do if you were a witness to this situation? Would you step in, start recording, or try to stay out of it? I'm curious about your thoughts in the comments. Sergeant Phillips arrived at a scene that was already spiraling out of control. Multiple officers, a growing crowd of witnesses, phones recording from every angle, and at the center of it all, a man in military dress uniform standing with the kind of composure that suggested this was far from over. Phillips had 20 years of experience. Enough to know when something didn't add up. Morrison's excited briefing about stolen vehicles and fake uniforms didn't match what Phillips was observing. The man in custody carried himself like career military. His uniform wasn't a costume. Every detail was regulation perfect. The ribbons, the alignment, the fabric quality, all of it screamed authenticity to anyone who knew what to look for. "Let me see that registration again," Phillips said, taking the documents Morrison had dismissed. The BMW plates came back registered to David M. Richardson. Vehicle financing through USAA, the military banking service. Not exactly the profile of a car thief. Phillips noticed Richardson's phone was dying, the screen showing missed calls from Sarah home, and Sarah home, and Sarah home again. A man's wife, probably wondering why he wasn't home yet from what should have been a routine drive. But Morrison wasn't backing down. Even faced with evidence, his assumptions ran too deep to abandon easily. "He probably stole the real guy's identity too," Morrison insisted. "These scammers are getting sophisticated." Phillips made the call Morrison should have made from the beginning. Fort Gordon's duty officer reached after being transferred twice through the weekend skeleton crew. "Sir, we have someone claiming to be Major David Richardson. Can you verify his status?" Richardson provided his social security number, service record details, unit designation. Information that would be impossible to fake unless someone had access to classified military databases. The base duty officer confirmed what should have been obvious from the beginning. Major David Richardson, active duty, decorated combat veteran, currently assigned to Fort Gordon. The BMW financing was verified through the military auto loan program. Combat pay, deployment bonuses, officer salary, all legitimate sources of income that made the vehicle purchase entirely reasonable. But even with official verification, Morrison refused to accept reality. Something's still not right. Real officers don't act like this. What Morrison couldn't understand was that real officers are trained to remain calm under pressure. They're trained to follow procedures, to document everything, to maintain dignity even when facing injustice. Richardson's behavior wasn't suspicious. It was exactly what you'd expect from someone with military training facing an impossible situation. Phillips finally did what should have been done an hour earlier. "You're free to go, Major. My apologies for the misunderstanding." But the damage was already done. Witnesses had captured everything. The initial confrontation, the evidence rejection, the continued accusations even after official verification. What should have been a routine encounter had become a masterclass in how prejudice can blind people to obvious truth. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several witnesses approached Richardson with their contact information. "I got it all on video," one college student said. "If you need it for anything." Richardson thanked them quietly, professionally, but inside he was processing what had just happened. A decorated military officer, in uniform at a gas station he visited every week, had been arrested based on assumptions about what he could afford and who he must be. The gas station attendant, who had watched the entire scene through bulletproof glass, finally spoke up. "That man's been coming here every Saturday for months. Always polite, always tips well. Never any trouble." Too little, too late. The confrontation was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Phillips tried to smooth things over. Let's just call this a misunderstanding and move forward. But Richardson knew better. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, a system, a set of assumptions so ingrained that official verification couldn't overcome them. Morrison remained defiant even as Richardson drove away. Something about that whole situation wasn't right, he told Phillips. You'll see. This isn't over. He was right about one thing. It wasn't over. But not in the way he expected. By the time Richardson reached home that night, multiple videos were already circulating on social media. Hashtag stolen BMW lie was starting to trend. The gas station security footage would soon be requested by news organizations. His dash cam had recorded the audio of the entire encounter. What Morrison thought was a routine arrest was about to become a case study in everything wrong with assumptions, prejudice, and the gap between supporting our troops and actually respecting them. The verification that should have taken 5 minutes had taken an hour. The respect that should have been automatic never came at all. And the consequences were about to reach far beyond one Saturday night at a gas station. You're not going to believe what happens when this video goes viral and the Pentagon gets involved. The cover-up attempts and the fight for justice will shock you. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to explode nationwide. Do you think Morrison's behavior was about racism, classism, or just poor police work? What's your take on what really motivated this confrontation? By Sunday morning, Major David Richardson's Saturday night had become national news. 6 different cell phone videos captured the confrontation from multiple angles. The gas station security system recorded Richardson's regular Saturday night visits going back months, showing the same routine, same polite interactions, same BMW, same uniform. But it was Richardson's own dash cam that provided the most damning evidence. Crystal clear audio of every accusation, every evidence dismissal, every assumption that led to an hour-long confrontation that should never have happened. The social media explosion was immediate and fierce. Hashtag stolen BMW lie began trending before dawn. Hashtag military while driving followed close behind. The videos were shared thousands of times in the first few hours, with each share adding commentary, outrage, and calls for action. Major news networks picked up the story for their Sunday morning shows. The details were too compelling to ignore. A decorated military officer in full dress uniform, arrested at a gas station because an officer couldn't believe he could afford his own car. Richardson's service record only made the story more inflammatory. Bronze Star for valor in Iraq. Purple Heart from an IED attack that left him hospitalized for 3 weeks. Multiple deployment ribbons. Airborne qualified. Ranger School graduate. This wasn't just any soldier. This was exactly the kind of service member politicians praise in speeches while apparently failing to recognize in gas station parking lots. The police department's first response was textbook damage control. We are aware of the incident and are conducting a thorough internal investigation. Translation: we're hoping this goes away quietly. But Richardson wasn't interested in quiet resolutions. Monday morning he filed a federal civil rights complaint. His military command structure was notified by noon. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office was monitoring social media by evening, watching as the story grew beyond anything they could contain. Officer Morrison was placed on paid administrative leave pending investigation. Standard procedure, but it felt inadequate given what the videos clearly showed. The police union immediately issued a statement supporting Morrison's difficult decision-making under challenging circumstances. Apparently, checking identification was considered challenging. Richardson's legal team faced an interesting situation. The evidence was overwhelming, public opinion was on their side, but history suggested that police officers rarely faced serious consequences for this kind of behavior. The videos were clear, but the system's response would depend on factors beyond just evidence. Community organizations mobilized quickly. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and military families began organizing support. The local NAACP chapter announced they were monitoring the case. The American Legion post in Richardson's hometown issued a statement condemning the treatment of their fellow veteran. But the most telling response came from Richardson's BMW dealership. Without being asked, they released a statement confirming Richardson's purchase, his financing arrangement, and his perfect payment record. The salesman who had initially been surprised by Richardson's budget wrote a personal letter describing Richardson's pride in earning his first new car through military service and sacrifice. By the end of the first week, The story had taken on a life of its own. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all the major networks were covering it. Social media was flooded with stories from other military members who had faced similar assumptions. #Uniform Respect became a rallying cry for service members who felt their sacrifice went unrecognized in civilian encounters. But beneath the media attention and public outrage, the real work of accountability was just beginning. Federal investigations move slowly. Internal police reviews move even slower. And changing ingrained attitudes and assumptions? That can take generations. Richardson found himself in an uncomfortable position. He never wanted to be a symbol or a spokesperson. He just wanted to drive home from a military banquet without being arrested for driving while black and successful. But the video had made him a face of a larger issue, whether he wanted that role or not. The Pentagon's involvement added another layer of complexity. Military officers are supposed to avoid political controversies. But this wasn't really political. It was about basic respect and recognition of service. Still, Richardson had to navigate carefully between seeking justice and maintaining his military career. Officer Morrison's history became part of the story as reporters dug deeper. 3 previous complaints of racial profiling, all dismissed after internal review. A pattern of assumptions and aggressive policing that had never faced serious consequences. The gas station incident wasn't an aberration. It was the logical result of a system that consistently excused this kind of behavior. The broader implications became clearer as the story spread. If a decorated military officer in full uniform could be arrested based on assumptions about what he could afford, what did that say about how the system treated ordinary citizens? If official military identification wasn't enough to establish credibility, what evidence would ever be sufficient? Richardson's wife Sarah spoke publicly for the first time 2 weeks after the incident. David served 3 tours overseas to protect the freedoms we're supposed to enjoy here at home. But apparently the freedom to drive a nice car while black isn't included in those protections. The gas station where it all happened became an unwilling landmark. People drove by to see where it happened. Some left flowers and American flags. Others left signs calling for justice. The night shift attendant who had recognized Richardson from his regular visits was interviewed by multiple news outlets, each time confirming the same thing. He was never any trouble. Always polite, always tipped well. But media attention and public outrage don't automatically translate into institutional change. The police department's investigation continued at bureaucratic pace. The federal review process had its own timeline. And Officer Morrison remained on paid leave, collecting his full salary while the system decided whether his actions warranted consequences. Richardson continued reporting to duty, continued serving his country, continued being the same professional soldier he'd always been. But something had changed. The incident had exposed a gap between the America he served and the America he experienced. The respect he earned in uniform overseas didn't automatically transfer to a gas station at home. The story was spreading, but the real question remained: would anything actually change? What happens next will determine whether this becomes just another viral video that people forget, or a real catalyst for change. The institutional response and the ongoing legal battle reveal everything about how our system really works. Stay subscribed to see how this fight for justice unfolds. Richardson said he never wanted to be a symbol, just wanted to drive home in peace. Do you think people in his situation have an obligation to speak out, or should they be able to just move on with their lives? 8 months after that Saturday night at the gas station, Major David Richardson was still fighting. The viral video had been viewed millions of times. The story had been covered by every major news outlet. Politicians had made statements. The Pentagon had launched reviews. And yet, fundamentally very little had changed. The police department's internal investigation had dragged on for months, hampered by procedural delays, bureaucratic obstacles, and what seemed like a genuine reluctance to reach any meaningful conclusions. Every few weeks, Richardson's legal team would receive another request for documentation, another delay, another reason why the investigation couldn't be completed yet. The Pentagon's review faced its own challenges. Military bureaucracy moves slowly under the best circumstances, but reviewing civilian police interactions with service members required coordination between multiple agencies, departments, and jurisdictions. The result was a review process that seemed designed to outlast public attention rather than reach meaningful conclusions. Officer Morrison remained on paid administrative leave, collecting his full salary while the investigation continued. In practical terms, he was receiving a paid vacation for behavior that the videos clearly documented. The police union's support never wavered, framing Morrison as a victim of Monday morning quarterbacking by people who weren't there and don't understand police work. Richardson testified before a congressional subcommittee on military affairs, describing his experience to a room full of politicians who expressed outrage and promised action. But congressional outrage and actual change are different things. The hearing generated headlines and sound bites, but no legislation emerged. The police department did implement some changes. Revised protocols for military identification verification was announced with great fanfare. The new policy required officers to give additional consideration to military credentials and to verify claims when possible. In practical terms, it was a suggestion rather than a requirement, and it came with so many exceptions that it might not have prevented Richardson's arrest anyway. Richardson received a promotion to lieutenant colonel, but the celebration was muted by subtle retaliation for his high-profile case. Military careers depend on the support of superiors, and some viewed Richardson's media attention as unwelcome controversy. His effectiveness reports remained excellent, but certain opportunities seemed to become unavailable, certain assignments seemed to go to other officers. The federal investigation remained perpetually ongoing with no clear timeline for completion. FBI agents had interviewed witnesses, reviewed evidence, and compiled reports, but the decision to file federal civil rights charges remained with Justice Department officials who seemed in no hurry to reach a conclusion. Morrison, meanwhile, had quietly transferred to a rural sheriff's department 2 counties away. No disciplinary action appeared on his record. No admission of wrongdoing was required. He simply moved to a new job where his history of problematic assumptions might be less likely to generate viral videos. Richardson's legal team faced a frustrating reality. The evidence was overwhelming, public support was strong, but institutional accountability remained elusive. Civil lawsuits take years. Federal investigations move at bureaucratic pace. And changing systemic problems requires more than one case, no matter how clear-cut it might seem. The community support that had initially rallied around Richardson remained strong but evolved. Fundraising for his legal costs continued through community events and online campaigns. Local veterans organizations made his case a symbol of broader issues facing service members. But sustaining outrage over months and years is challenging, especially when the system seems designed to exhaust people's patience. Richardson found himself speaking at community events, police academy graduations, and military functions about respect, service, and the gap between supporting troops in theory and recognizing them in practice. It wasn't a role he had sought, but it had become part of his service to his country and his community. The gas station where it all happened returned to normal operations, but the night shift attendant still remembered. "People sometimes ask me about that night," he said months later. "I tell them the same thing I told everyone then. That man was never any trouble. Always polite, always respectful. What happened to him could happen to anybody." Richardson's wife Sarah became involved in military spouse advocacy, connecting his experience to broader issues of how military families are perceived and treated in civilian communities. "This isn't just about one night or one officer," she explained. "It's about assumptions that people make about service members and military families every day." The Pentagon Review eventually produced a 47-page report with recommendations for improving civilian-military police interactions. Training programs were suggested. Liaison protocols were proposed. Better communication systems were outlined. All reasonable suggestions that would require local implementation, ongoing funding, and sustained attention to become reality. 8 months after the viral video, Richardson sat in another town hall meeting, fielding questions from community members about his experience and ongoing legal case. The questions were familiar by now. What did he want people to learn? How could this be prevented from happening again? What would justice look like? The video went viral, Richardson told the crowd, but the system didn't change. That's why we keep fighting. Justice doesn't come from one viral moment. It comes from not giving up when the attention fades and the cameras go away. Community members pledged continued support, but Richardson knew the reality. Sustained activism is difficult. People have their own lives, their own problems, their own priorities. The initial outrage was genuine, but maintaining that energy over months and years requires more than most people can give. This isn't about me anymore, Richardson continued. It's about the next person who won't have a camera recording. It's about changing assumptions so that evidence matters more than expectations. It's about making sure service members are recognized and respected, not profiled and arrested. The legal battles continued. The federal investigation remained open. The community support persisted. But real change, the kind that prevents the next viral video, remained elusive. Richardson drove home that night in the same BMW, now decorated with military and civil rights stickers that told the story of his ongoing fight. The radio played background news. The Department of Justice announced today they are still reviewing the case involving. Still reviewing. Still investigating. Still considering. The language of institutions that have learned to outlast public attention and individual persistence. But Richardson kept fighting because that's what soldiers do. They don't quit when the battle gets difficult. They don't surrender when the enemy seems stronger. They keep fighting because some things are worth fighting for, even when the outcome is uncertain. The gas station incident had ended months ago. The fight for accountability and change continued. And Richardson had learned something that no amount of military training had prepared him for. Sometimes the most important battles happen not on foreign battlefields, but in American parking lots, courtrooms, and community centers where the struggle for basic dignity and respect continues, one case, one story, one viral video at a time. The system hadn't changed yet. But Richardson was still fighting. And sometimes that's where real change begins. This story isn't over. Richardson's fight continues, and cases like his happen every day across America. If you believe our service members deserve better, and if you think evidence should matter more than assumptions, then subscribe and share this video. Real change happens when people refuse to let stories like this disappear into bureaucratic delays and institutional inertia. After hearing this complete story, what do you think needs to change to prevent this from happening to the next service member? Is it training, accountability, systemic reform, or something else entirely? I want to hear your thoughts on how we actually create the change that Richardson is still fighting for.